Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to The Broken Past. Today, we have two things. We have this, and we have this. And why do we have both of these? Well, you guessed it. Joycons, meaning Joy-Con drift. So, we also have this, which you can't see because there's a reflection. But, today we have two Joy-Cons, both with really bad Joy-Con drift on them. These were actually the original ones that I got on my release day Switch. They worked really well actually for a long time. I haven't had a huge issue with them. Recently I gave them to my son to play with, and I think they've just worn out to the point that they have serious drift. You can see an example of that here where I try to calibrate the Joy-Cons. Alright, so let's see how bad these Joy-Cons actually are. So I'm going to start by going to settings, which we can already see. It's really jumpy. Let's see if we can actually get to settings. There we go. Let's calibrate the control sticks. Let's start with the left joystick. Okay, so it centers. That's good. Let's see. Yep. So we have, it's not the worst, but it's definitely not very good. We definitely have Joy-Con drift though. So we can see that. And so there we go. Now we're stuck in a rotating state. It never properly reset back to the center. And I have tried recalibrating these at this point, and it doesn't even try to recalibrate them. It will not detect that I'm trying to recenter it. So clearly this one is broken and needs to be replaced. This one's not quite as bad. Oh, there we go. There's some drift to it going off to the right now. So this one is also not perfect. It should be replaced as well. Yep, now it's just drifting off to the right. So clearly these are bad, and clearly they need to be replaced. But that's okay. The fix is actually pretty easy on these. I know the fix has been around for a long time. I've actually never ended up having Joy-Cons that were this bad, but now that I do, we can make a video. So let's go ahead and set these off to the side and see what we have in this kit. So this is a real cheap kit. I think I bought it off of Amazon as a 2-pack for like $12, $15, and it comes with 2 replacement joysticks and additional tools to do the job, as well as some additional fun little joystick covers if you want those, which I don't care about those. And we do get a tri-wing screwdriver as well as a Phillips head screwdriver, and of course the spudger and the pick and other accessories. But the main thing is the 2 individual joysticks. They are universal. They work for both the left and the right Joy-Cons, so you don't need to look for one specifically for the individual Joy-Con that you're working on. But we are going to go ahead and actually start with the left Joy-Con first, mainly because it has much fewer sensors and stuff in it, so it's a little bit easier to kind of get our feet wet in trying to get one of these replaced. So we're going to start with this. Get some of my tools moved out of the way here. And we're going to start by removing the 4 screws on the back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, these are tri-wing screws, so you will need to have a tri-wing screwdriver to remove these. If your kit doesn't come with one of those, you'll have to just make sure you get one alongside of it. So we will start by removing these. And these are all the same size, so you should be okay with not making sure of which ones came from which spot, but it's always good just to double check and make sure that you're not expecting them to be the same size and then realizing later that they are different and you don't know where they came from. And we may need to use the spudger to slightly pull these apart, depending on how old they are and how potentially grimy they've gotten. But we can always just use a finger too. Again, being careful that there are ribbon cables through here. So we do want to be careful. We're just going to slightly work our way through here, popping these 2 halves apart. And then at that point, keeping the power rail off on the left, we're just going to kind of open it right up and slide it just like that. And from here, we do have these small battery connector, so if we can show that in there, that we need to remove so we can pull the battery out and eventually get the subframe removed. And that shouldn't come out with too much effort. Should just be able to pull it up and out. There we are. And again, if we have resistance, always just make sure get a little bit of leverage under it if you need to. And we also need to remove the battery out of here. And this is slightly taped in there, so we just have to make sure that we don't accidentally puncture or deform the battery in the process. But with a little bit of work, we can get it out and we can see, probably not very well on camera, but we can see there's just a couple small pieces of double-sided adhesive in there to hold the battery in place. So from here we have a number of screws that we can see, but we only care about the 3 gold-colored screws in here. We'll remove those next. After doing that, we can lift up and start to remove the mid-frame. We got to be careful because there's a ribbon cable still attached to the mid-frame. So we're going to slide that out of the way here. And that is a very thin ribbon cable. So we want to be very careful that we don't stress that one. And we do have, I'm going to grab my tweezers, a very small flap for this ribbon cable. And we can gently remove it up and out of the way. There we go. And lastly, we have one more small ribbon cable that we'll want to remove, which is for, I believe this is the minus button on the back side. So in the same way, lift up on that and pull the cable out. This just allows us to get access to that last screw, that's right there. We have the last cable for the Joycon. Let's bring that out. And now we'll take the 2 screws, holding the Joycon in place. Being careful not to bump this cable in the process and lose that spring. All right, and then lastly, we pull the joystick out, trying our best to not mess with that black gasket that's in there. Kind of set that back into place. All right. The next steps go in reverse. We're going to start with our new joystick. And again, being careful with that black gasket. Get our ribbon cables out of the way. There we are. Hopefully this is all still kind of staying in frame here. Attach the 1 screw. And the other. And now very carefully reattach our ribbon cables. First with the joystick. Okay. And Put this shoulder button back in again. And now very carefully with the plus button ribbon cable, a super thin cable, slide that right in. And lastly, we have our also very thin mid-frame cable here. And then carefully bend everything back into place. Drop our mid-frame cable back down. Get everything placed back how it was. Attach our 3 mid-frame screws. Reattach our battery. And reinstall the battery. Again, the battery installs just by pressing down on that connector. There we are. And then lastly, close it all back up. Again, making sure that we don't pinch any ribbon cables and that everything slides right back in where it's supposed to go. Check for play. Joystick feels good. And then install the 4 outer screws. And screw it all back together. And at this point, I would suggest testing this on the console, but because we're going to be replacing both of these, I'm going to go ahead and replace this one next, and then we'll test it out at the end. Alright, so now that we're done with the left Joy-Con, let's move on to the right one. And I think I'm actually going to go ahead and move the camera in a little bit closer. I feel like the other one may have been a bit far away. Hopefully we can get a little bit better close-up with this one. So we're going to move on to the right one. And the right one is very similar to the left one. We just need to pay a little bit of attention to the antenna that's in here. But for the most part, all the steps are the exact same. So we're going to start by removing, again, the 4 outer tri-wing screws. Now the kit that I got did come with replacement screws, so you could always use those if you need to, if you happen to lose one of these, because these are so small. But a lot of times I prefer to use the screws that it came with, if you can. Sometimes it feels like they're just machined maybe a little bit better. And it will last longer. But obviously if you lose one, having a different one to replace it with is better than having no screw. So it's always nice if they do come with replacement screws. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our spudger, just find a little spot. Just start opening it up. Work our way around, opening the clips. And again, remember that we have ribbon cables in here. So just like the other one, we're going to open it up away from the power rail because there are going to be ribbon cables we need to worry about. We'll set those here. And we have the battery cable to try to remove again. There we are. Now with the right Joy-Con, we actually don't need to remove the battery. The screws to remove this whole mid-frame are actually not underneath of the battery, but by removing it, it is going to help a little bit to have some less ribbon cables and weight and everything to deal with. So I'm going to follow the same steps again and try to get the tape loosened up and get the battery out of here. There we go. And so again, this one does have an antenna, so we just need to make sure that we look, kind of show it here in video, how the antenna is run up and inside the mid-frame, and then it just sits against the outside. So we're going to remove that, it just slides out. And unrun it out of here. There we go. And just like before, we have 3 screws that we need to remove. And they are one here, one back here, and one down here. And these are the Phillips screws. So we get out our other screwdriver. And then from there, we can remove the frame. Again, making sure we watch out for the really tiny ribbon cable that is in here. Trying to see if we don't need to actually remove the ribbon cable or not. You know, I don't think we will. We'll just kind of set it off to the side here. And just like before, we have, this one's a little bit easier. We have fewer ribbon cables we need to deal with. So we have our 2 screws. And pull the ribbon cable out. And just like before, the joystick will come right out, but there is that gasket underneath that likes to get caught a little bit on the joystick head. There we go. And then we just put the new one in its place. I'm going to start by putting it in and getting it screwed down. There we go. And then getting the ribbon cable reinstalled. This is a bit tricky just because it's right up next to the frame of this Joycon shell. Go. And then we actually I need to reinstall the shoulder button that accidentally fell out on me. And then very carefully set that back over. Oops. There we go. And then we have our 3 screws for the mid frame. The next step is to reinstall our antenna. There we go. And just like before, run it the same way that it was run. And then slot it back right there. And reinstall the battery. So just like before, set that back in. And then to reinstall the connector, you just get it in place, which is actually a bit tricky. And then give it a push. And we're back in. And the last thing we need to do at this point is just close it up. And reinstall our 4 screws. Remembering that these are the tri-wing. And then we tighten them up. Checking buttons, they both feel good. And that's it. So at this point, we are ready to test them out. So let me get the switch and let's see if they still work. All right, so we've got our switch and our 2 fixed joysticks on our Joy-Con controllers. So let's test this out and see if it still works. Or let's see if it works better than it did before. So we're going to start off by connecting them to the switch. See if it docks. Yep. And the right one. Yep, that looks good. Can move around. So let's go to our controller settings and make sure, still in frame, that the joysticks are working. So let's test those out. So we're going to start with the left one. And we can see that that seems to work perfect. Snaps right back to center from every angle. No dead spots. Perfect. So let's check the right one now. Make sure that one's also good. Same thing. Full circle, full snap to center. I know the right one wasn't as bad as the left one, but it still got in that state where it was stuck on the edge. But this seems to be working good. So last thing is, let's check the buttons and make sure everything is still working. So minus button, good. Plus, those are still working. Left, right, up, down. And A, B, or AX, B, Y. All those are still working. Shoulder buttons. Yep. Everything is good. Let's back out of here. And that's it. I think we're golden. Everything seems to work well. Relatively easy fix. These are the old ones. These no longer work. You can take these apart. It's not a permanent fix. There is a way to get these apart and clean sort of the electrical contacts inside of there to help fix that drifting issue. But for 12 bucks and these replacement joysticks, they look and feel exactly the same. And as far as I know, they are basically the exact same joysticks that came with the controllers. So I'm happy with this. Everything's good. The last joysticks, lasted me 4 years, 5 years, however long this has been out now. And this is working great now with the new joysticks. So I am happy with that. Everything's still working. Everything works better than it did before. So yeah, easy fix. Really the only thing to be worried about are those small ribbon cables that are in there. Those are super fragile, easy to break. I'm sure it probably came across on the video, but trying to handle the 3 pieces of the shell and not break the ribbon cables and install the screws and all that stuff can be a bit finicky. But just take your time, go slow. It's really not too hard to do. And you'll have brand new joysticks when you're done that will hopefully last you for a long time moving forward. So yeah, easy fix. That's all we have for this video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.